Hello everyone, I am Vanish Signal. And before we start with some news stories, like and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down below from where you are watching this. The night triage vanished. At a modest regional hospital nestled deep in North Carolina, ER nurse Tony reported something in 2019 that she never forgot and wouldn't speak about again. During her overnight shift, around 2:45 a.m., a man was wheeled into the emergency room. Male, roughly mid-30s, unresponsive but alive, with what appeared to be extensive third-degree burns across his chest, arms, and neck. He had no wallet, no ID, and wasn't in the system. Tony tried speaking to him, and though he was barely conscious, he mumbled in a language she didn't recognize. Soft, guttural syllables that didn't sound quite human. The team got ready for trauma intake, paged the specialists, and rushed through the early evaluation steps. 5 minutes later, when the trauma crew entered the bay, the gurney was empty. Completely empty. Tony swore she hadn't stepped away for more than 30 seconds. Security was immediately alerted. They reviewed the hallway and trauma room footage. On the recording, you could see Tony talking to the man, leaning close. Then came 5 seconds of pure video distortion. No static, just black and white bands, like something interfering with the feed. When the image cleared, the man was gone. The stretcher still sat in place, now visibly singed. No one entered, no doors opened, no alarms triggered. The maintenance crew that cleaned the trauma bay later said the floor beneath the stretcher had faint scorch marks, and the rubber on the wheels was partially melted, like they'd been sitting in a fire. Hospital administration logged the event as a security malfunction. Tony handed in her resignation 2 weeks later without another word. To this day, nobody knows where the man came from or where he went. Room 6, a Westbrook Medical, a large teaching hospital in Ohio, has a hallway no one walks at night unless they absolutely have to. It's on the 6th floor, ICU wing, at the far end near a storage alcove. Room 6A. Staff know not to assign it after 10 p.m. Not anymore. Not since the night in 2003 when the room locked itself. It started like any other shift. A cardiac arrest patient, male, 57, had been stabilized in the ER and transferred upstairs for observation. The night nurse assigned to that wing, Claudia, did her rounds at 2:10 a.m. She knocked gently on the 6A door. Inside, she heard movement, slow pacing, and a man's voice softly weeping. The chart showed the patient had been alert at midnight and sedated shortly after. No reason he should have been standing or crying. She tried the door. Locked. No lock from the inside on ICU room doors. It should have been impossible. Security was called, and when they arrived, they forced the door open. Inside, the lights were off. The bed was made. The heart monitor showed a flat line, but there was no body. No chart. No sign of a patient ever being admitted. Claudia, shaken and unsure, reviewed the system. The patient's entry had vanished. No digital trail. The nurse who handed off the shift to her insisted she never had a 6A patient listed. Claudia was written up for confusion and advised to take the week off. Since then, room 6A is always labeled out of order from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Occasionally, someone new forgets, assigns a patient. Every time that happens, something odd follows. Lights flickering, pacing footsteps behind closed doors, soft sobbing in the hallway, impossible to trace. Last fall, an intern made that mistake again. They assigned a post-op patient to room 6A. The morning nurse found the bed empty, but when she checked the vitals machine still connected to the bed, it displayed a strong, steady heartbeat. The patient was later found wandering the rooftop garden in a hospital gown, claiming someone kept calling from the walls. The screaming in pediatrics. During a particularly stormy night in 2015, a skeleton crew staffed the pediatric wing of a mid-sized hospital in Oregon. Most of the children were asleep, sedated after evening meds. Around 3:10 a.m., the monitors in rooms 9, 11, and 13 began alarming all at once. Vitals spiked, heart rates shot up, oxygen levels dropped, and each child began screaming in sync. 3 nurses rushed in, stumbling over each other in their panic. The children were not just crying. They were screaming, shaking, clutching their blankets like shields, eyes fixed on the corners of their dimly lit rooms. Each of them spoke of a man with no mouth standing in the corner. They described him identically. Tall, pale, hollow face, no features where a mouth should be, and in his hand, a strange object that ticked like a warped clock. The nurses checked the rooms thoroughly. Nothing. Security conducted a full sweep. Still nothing. But all 3 children had identical injuries. Long, thin scratches on their forearms, marked at odd angles that would have been physically impossible for them to make on their own. Burned slightly at the edges, like the wounds had been cauterized mid-scratch. They were documented as self-inflicted because there was no alternative explanation. None of the children had fingernails long enough, and their bed sheets were unfrayed. When questioned, 2 of them stopped speaking entirely. They stared ahead, refusing eye contact, refusing to blink. The 3rd child, a 7-year-old girl, began compulsively drawing clocks, dozens of them, always set to 3:10 a.m. For the remainder of the week, every night at exactly 3:10 a.m., the hallway lights in that wing flickered in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Staff avoided the area. And on the final night, a nurse passing by room 11 saw a handprint on the inside of the glass, one too large to belong to any child. Dr. Keller's final round doctor, Alan Keller, had been a fixture at the teaching hospital in Pennsylvania for over 2 decades. He was known for his clinical brilliance and dry, precise bedside manner. He never missed a round. He never made mistakes. But in the early fall of 2007, something changed. He started losing track of time, forgetting patients' names mid-sentence. During handovers, he'd repeat phrases like a scratched record. Colleagues noticed strange annotations in patient charts, prescriptions written for non-existent drugs, observations about symptoms no one had. One night, on the final hour of his shift, he simply vanished. The only trace was a cryptic line he'd scrawled in the margin of a chart. Vitals steady, but she's still humming. He had been assigned to the geriatric wing, and his final check-in was noted in room 413. Except room 413 had been out of use for over a year due to mold. It was locked, sealed, and untouched. Security pulled the camera footage. It showed Keller walking into room 413 just past 2:30 a.m. He never came out. There was no visual of him exiting, no sign of tampering with the lock. The next morning, 2 staff members forced the door open. The room was empty, but the walls, ceiling, and floor were covered in dusty, disorganized footprints. Dozens of them. Most traced a slow circle around the room. All matched Dr. Keller's shoes. His ID badge was discovered beneath the sink in the staff lounge 3 days later. It was charred, melted at the edges, as if exposed to intense heat. But there was no fire, no malfunction, no plausible cause. Following the incident, hospital policy was updated. Any staff entering room 413 after dark must be accompanied by another person and must check in via radio before and after entry. No one speaks of Dr. Keller anymore. But occasionally, During the late shift, the motion sensor in room 413 lights up, and those inside swear they hear humming, low and rhythmic, coming from behind the walls. The fifth floor code? In 2012, a downtown hospital in Chicago shut down its fifth floor for asbestos removal. The floor had been off limits for over 8 months. No power, no elevator access, doors sealed tight. The lights had been cut, and signs warned staff of hazardous conditions. No one had a reason to go up there, and most had forgotten it existed. But during a graveyard shift, at approximately 2:41 a.m., a nurse on the 4th floor reported hearing heavy, frantic footsteps directly above her during a code blue in room 418. It wasn't the kind of sound you could mistake. Sharp, pounding steps like someone sprinting from one end of the building to the other. It lasted for a full 30 seconds, then stopped, then started again. Nurses and a night orderly confirmed the sounds. Security was called, and 2 guards responded. The elevator wouldn't open past the 4th floor, so they took the stairwell. Their flashlights illuminated walls coated in dust. Cobwebs clung to the corners of the handrails. When they reached the 5th floor door, the heavy lock was visibly untouched. There was no sign of entry. But from behind the door, they both heard it. Rapid movement, something heavy scraping across the linoleum, followed by what sounded like a child's cry. One of the guards waited while the other went for bolt cutters. Alone in the dark, the remaining guard radioed in that the sound had shifted, no longer movement, but soft crying. He pressed his ear to the door. The crying turned into laughter. When they finally cut through and opened the door, their beam swept across an empty, dust-choked hallway. Everything was coated in a thick layer of gray. No footprints, no drag marks, no recent human presence. But the nurse's station desk had something strange. An old code pager, outdated and dusty, sat perfectly upright. It wasn't connected to the system anymore, yet the screen glowed faintly. The message was simple. Room 502. Start compressions. The hospital didn't have a room 502. It never had. Room 6AA, first-year intern at a small hospital in rural Tennessee, was assigned the late-night chart rounds during his second week. The hospital was quiet, mostly older patients in long-term care, and most of the halls were dim by midnight. Around 2:15 a.m., he approached the last name on his list, Room 6A, curiously absent from the patient briefing he received earlier that day. The hallway felt colder as he approached. The light outside 6A flickered. The door stood slightly open. Inside, he saw a woman sitting upright in bed, illuminated faintly by the moonlight filtering through the window blinds. She had long gray hair, her face sunken, but calm, and she wore a standard hospital gown. There was no chart in the wall holder, and she didn't have a wristband. He greeted her quietly. No answer. As he stepped closer, she turned her head slowly and said, almost inaudibly, "Tell him I'm not ready yet." Unsettled, he stepped out and returned to the nurse's station to ask about the patient. The charge nurse frowned. 6A's closed, she said. It's been closed since last December. Pipe damage. No one's been assigned there. They walked back together. The hallway was silent. The door to 6A was closed now. The nurse unlocked it, and inside, the bed was stripped and the room was empty. Just a spare gurney and storage boxes. Shaken, the intern later looked into old patient records and found something odd. 3 years ago, a woman had died in that room. She'd refused a scheduled surgery, choosing to let her condition progress. Her final words, recorded by the attending nurse on the night she passed, "Tell him I'm not ready yet." After that, the intern refused to work solo night shifts. He eventually transferred hospitals after one more strange event. A page from room 6A received at 3:06 a.m. during his shift. The room wasn't connected to the system, and no one could explain how the page came through. The elevator patient. At a large one of the guards waited while the other went for bolt cutters. Alone in the dark, the remaining guard radioed in that the sound had shifted, no longer movement, but soft crying. He pressed his ear to the door. The crying turned into laughter. When they finally cut through and opened the door, their beam swept across an empty, dust-choked hallway. Everything was coated in a thick layer of gray. No footprints, no drag marks, no recent human presence. But the nurse's station desk had something strange. An old code pager, outdated and dusty, sat perfectly upright. It wasn't connected to the system anymore, yet the screen glowed faintly. The message was simple. Room 502. Start compressions. The hospital didn't have a room 502. It never had. Room 6AA, first-year intern at a small hospital in rural Tennessee, was assigned the late-night chart rounds during his second week. The hospital was quiet, mostly older patients in long-term care, and most of the halls were dim by midnight. Around 2:15 a.m., he approached the last name on his list, Room 6A, curiously absent from the patient briefing he received earlier that day. The hallway felt colder as he approached. The light outside 6A flickered. The door stood slightly open. Inside, he saw a woman sitting upright in bed, illuminated faintly by the moonlight filtering through the window blinds. She had long gray hair, her face sunken, but calm, and she wore a standard hospital gown. There was no chart in the wall holder, and she didn't have a wristband. He greeted her quietly. No answer. As he stepped closer, she turned her head slowly and said, almost inaudibly, "Tell him I'm not ready yet." Unsettled, he stepped out and returned to the nurse's station to ask about the patient. The charge nurse frowned. 6A's closed, she said. It's been closed since last December. Pipe damage. No one's been assigned there. They walked back together. The hallway was silent. The door to 6A was closed now. The nurse unlocked it. When the power returned, the patient was back to lying flat. Calm, monitors steady, breathing normal. James blinked, unsure if he'd hallucinated the entire thing. They reached the third floor, and the nurse on duty looked at the chart. Her brow furrowed. "This isn't one of ours," she said. They checked the database. The chart ID didn't exist. No surgery had been logged for that patient name. Then James checked the tag again. His stomach dropped. The name matched a man who'd gone into surgery earlier that day, but who hadn't survived. James remembered hearing about it at shift change, a cardiac arrest mid-procedure. But here he was, or had been. The chart vanished from the system by morning. The nurse who received them wouldn't talk about it. James started requesting only lower floor runs after that. Scrub Room 9. In a trauma center located on the edge of the Arizona desert, surgical staff had a habit of avoiding one particular scrub room, Room 9. Nestled at the very end of a dim, narrow hallway near the operating theaters, it had always had a strange energy. The ventilation seemed off, the lights buzzed like old neon, and the floor tiles were uneven like the building had shifted beneath them. Staff passed it off as poor design and shrugged it away, until people started seeing things in the mirror. Dr. Langen, a respected anesthesiologist known for his calm demeanor, was the first to report something strange. He'd entered Scrub Room 9 at 6:45 a.m. to prep for a standard appendectomy. As he scrubbed at the sink and glanced up at the mirror, he caught a reflection of someone behind him. Another person in full surgical scrubs, mask on, cap tight. but the figure's eyes were entirely black. No sclera, no iris, just voids. When he spun around, there was no one there. He dismissed it as a trick of the light. But something gnawed at him. So, after his surgery, he casually mentioned it to a nurse. To his surprise, she paled immediately. "You saw him too?" she whispered. Over the following weeks, reports piled up. Nurses and surgeons alike described glimpses in the mirror of people who weren't in the room. Some said the mirror didn't show them correctly. Their reflection faced the wrong way or blinked when they hadn't. One nurse said she saw herself smiling in the reflection while she stood stone-faced. Maintenance was called to investigate. No wiring faults, no camera tricks. A hospital psychologist reviewed staff for stress symptoms, citing long hours and trauma exposure. Then the janitor found something while replacing a tile behind the mirror. An old damp surgical schedule from 1994, pinned to the wall. Most of the names were unfamiliar, but one stood out. Dr. Langen, logged for a procedure that no one remembered, a surgery on a patient that didn't exist. The surgery had been assigned to operating room 9, the one directly next to scrub room 9. The mirror was replaced, a newer one, brighter and smaller. The original was supposedly discarded, but some say it never made it to the dumpster, that it's locked away in the basement with the other things the hospital doesn't talk about. The room is still used today, but even the boldest surgeons avoid the mirror. They scrub, dry, and turn away fast, because every so often, someone says it blinks, and they don't. Code Blue and 6A nurses on the 6th floor of a community hospital in Ohio still whisper about the Code Blue that never happened. It was exactly 3:11 a.m., and the floor was unusually quiet. Patients asleep in their rooms, vital monitors humming steadily, and the night staff pared down to a skeleton crew. Nothing out of the ordinary had been reported during handoff. But suddenly, shattering the silence, the hospital intercom erupted. "Code Blue, room 6A." The staff sprang into action. 3 nurses and 2 aides rushed to room 6A, which sat tucked away at the far end of the hallway past the nurses' station. But when they opened the door, they were met with cold air and confusion. The room was not only empty, it had been stripped bare. No bed, no monitors, no patient chart. The blinds were drawn, and the light overhead flickered erratically. Room 6A had been sealed off for renovations for over 2 weeks. No one was assigned there. No one was supposed to be there at all. Assuming a malfunction, the charge nurse radioed maintenance while the rest of the team checked the intercom console. Nothing. No call-out log, no audio playback, no system error. It was as if the alert had never happened. And yet, everyone on shift that night, 6 people, heard the call. Things got stranger when one of the aides, scrolling through the security feeds, noticed a shadow moving past the nurse's station at precisely 3:11 a.m. The figure was blurry, indistinct, but appeared to be wearing a hospital gown. No footsteps, no sound. No one remembered seeing anyone walk by in real time. And the automatic door to room 6A? It never opened. Not once that night. Later that week, a young nurse reviewing old incident reports found something chilling. 3 years earlier, a man named Leonard Travis had died in room 6A. He'd gone into cardiac arrest overnight. Due to an intercom failure and short staffing, no Code Blue was called in time. By the time anyone found him, he was already cold. The official time of death listed in his chart, 3:11 a.m. Now, every so often, room 6A seems to call for help, just a few years too late. The woman in pediatrics. At a children's hospital nestled in the suburbs of Oregon, pediatric night nurses are used to the strange and the surreal. Kids waking from nightmares, whispered secrets about imaginary friends, sudden bursts of laughter in the middle of the night. But during the winter of 2017, a new story began to circulate through the halls, and this one wasn't so easy to dismiss. It began with Caleb, a 6-year-old recovering from an uncomplicated appendectomy. He was sweet, quiet, polite. But after his second night on the ward, he started talking about a lady who visited him after lights out. "She floats," he told the nurse during morning rounds. "She has white clothes, and she sings like this." He hummed a tune no one recognized. At first, the staff smiled. Post-op dreams were common. Pain meds and anesthesia did strange things to children. But then it happened again. Another child, in a different room, described a woman in white who walked through the walls. A girl across the hall began waking up crying, saying someone touched her hair while she slept. A teenager recovering from a broken femur asked who the nurse in the long dress was that sat by her window humming lullabies. Nurses were spooked but curious. They set up cameras. For several nights, nothing happened. But then one morning, the nurse manager arrived to find the overnight footage corrupted, except for one clip. It showed a faint silhouette at the edge of the camera frame. A tall figure, pale, flowing, gliding silently across the floor. The moment she appeared, the lights in the hallway dimmed and a toy on the counter began to play music, without batteries. Then, static. The video glitched and froze. Staff began rotating shifts so no one had to be in pediatrics alone. Thermostats in those rooms read colder than anywhere else in the hospital. Monitors flickered. Alarms chirped with no cause. One CNA claimed she saw a woman's face in the window reflection when she was alone in the break room. Security pulled historical blueprints and uncovered something buried beneath layers of hospital expansion. The wing had once been the original tuberculosis ward from decades earlier, used to house infected children during the outbreak of 1937. It was a place of suffering, death, and isolation. Staff records were incomplete, but one name came up in handwritten logs. Eleanor Keene, a volunteer nurse who worked there until her death from TB in 1938. Behind a loose panel in Caleb's room, staff found an old woolen blanket. The initials EK were stitched into the corner. When asked again who the lady was, Caleb shrugged. She said her name was Ellie. She just didn't want me to be alone. The hallway light. There's a hallway in the basement of St. Mark's Medical Center in Pennsylvania that most staff avoid unless absolutely necessary. It runs behind the newer wings of the hospital, connecting the imaging lab to a records archive that barely anyone visits now. The floor tiles are older than the rest of the hospital and have a hollow echo to them, like they were laid over something empty. On certain nights, usually sometime around 2:30 a.m., the overhead fluorescent light at the far end of the corridor begins to flicker. Not just a typical electrical buzz, but a rhythmic pulse, like someone walking back and forth beneath it. But no one's there, or at least no one who should be. Several technicians who've had to cut through the hallway during overnight shifts have reported hearing footsteps. Not fast, not heavy, but dragging, uneven, like someone tired or injured was walking just a few feet behind them. One radiologist, new to night rotation, swore he heard deep breathing the entire walk through. A slow, raspy inhale and exhale that stayed at his back until he reached the elevator. When he turned, the hallway was empty, save for the flickering light blinking steadily like a metronome. He doesn't use that hallway anymore. Maintenance has replaced the bulb repeatedly. Entire sections of the wiring were ripped out and redone after a short-circuit scare. Still, the light flickers. Still, the footsteps come. And 2 months ago, things got worse. Security footage captured a janitor named Luis walking his usual route through that corridor. Everything looked normal until he stopped dead in the middle of the frame. He turned slowly, looking behind him, face pale. Then he dropped his mop and sprinted out of frame. When asked about it the next day, he refused to talk. He didn't return to work. His paycheck still sits in payroll. Hospital archives showed that the hallway used to be part of the original hospital's morgue transport route, where deceased patients were wheeled from wards to cold storage. In 1972, a porter collapsed from a sudden heart attack there. He was found clutching a broken wristwatch. The time on it? 2:31 a.m. People say if you walk through at that time and the light flickers 3 times in a row, don't stop, just keep walking. Someone might be trying to follow. The man in scrubs. During the winter of 2014, the emergency department at a large hospital in Michigan reached a breaking point. The flu season was brutal. Every hallway was packed with gurneys, the waiting room overflowed, and nurses barely had time to breathe. Interns ran on fumes, hopping between trauma codes and admissions, sleeping in corners and break rooms whenever they could steal a moment. That's when the first patient mentioned him. A middle-aged woman in observation said a nurse had come to check on her late at night. He didn't speak, just smiled gently, handed her water, and adjusted her blanket. She thanked him, but when morning came, no one on the nursing staff had any idea who she was talking about. Then another patient described the same man, tall, wiry, dressed in dark green scrubs. Said he held her hand when she thought she was dying. Said he smelled like antiseptic and smoke. At first, staff assumed it was a case of confused patients, or maybe some well-meaning but off-the-clock med student. But the reports kept coming. 7 patients in 3 weeks described him. Same look, same silence, same tired eyes. The staff started calling him the quiet nurse. He'd appear in empty rooms, sometimes caught in the corner of a visitor's photo, or walking past a window in a wing that was supposed to be closed. It escalated when a new resident sleeping in the on-call room woke up with the feeling that someone was sitting at the edge of the bed. When she opened her eyes, he was there, just watching her. She screamed, but he didn't flinch. He didn't move. He slowly faded like a shadow when the light changes. Terrified, she ran to the nurses' lounge. When she told them, one of the older nurses pulled out a black and white memorial photo from a storage box. It was from 1982, a tribute to Charles Wren, an ER nurse who died in a fire in the supply closet. He'd gone back in to save a patient when the beam collapsed. The photo showed a man in dark scrubs, gaunt, tired eyes. The resemblance was exact. Ever since that flu season, sightings of the quiet nurse have continued. Staff say if you smell disinfectant and the faint trace of something burning, he's close. He doesn't hurt anyone. But if he stops at your bed and holds your hand, they say your prognosis may have just changed. Because Charles Wren only stayed behind that night to help a dying patient. And maybe he's still doing the same thing, even after death. The waiting room clock. At North Valley Regional, there's a small waiting room next to the surgical ICU that no one likes to use. It's tucked into a corner near the end of a hallway, away from the noise and bustle of the nurses' station. Quiet. Too quiet. On the surface, it looks like any other waiting area. Plastic chairs, a coffee machine that hasn't worked in years, a stack of magazines that haven't been rotated since 2008. But it's the clock on the wall that unnerves people. It's a standard analog wall clock, beige with a thin glass cover. Except it doesn't tell the right time. Not just wrong by a few minutes, wrong by hours. Some days it's fast, some days it's slow. Maintenance has replaced the batteries a dozen times. Once, they even replaced the entire clock. But within a week, the new one started doing the same thing. Several staff members have commented on the same strange pattern. The clock always seems to freeze or jump forward when someone is about to receive bad news. One nurse swore it stopped completely the moment she entered the room to tell a family that their loved one hadn't made it through surgery. The second hand was stuck, twitching in place like it couldn't move forward. Even stranger, multiple families who've sat in that waiting room report hearing faint ticking when the clock isn't moving at all. Not mechanical, but sharp and irregular, like fingernails tapping glass. Sometimes they hear whispering. A long-retired surgeon once told a resident, half-jokingly, that the clock didn't track time, it tracked grief. "Watch it next time someone gets a visit from a doctor with a clipboard," he said. "It'll jump when the truth hits." Now most families are brought to other waiting rooms. And the clock still hangs there, still ticking wrong. The morgue elevator. Every hospital has an elevator meant for discreet patient transfers, especially for those who don't make it. At Crestline General, that elevator is located at the far end of the old south wing, now mostly unused except for overflow and night staff. Officially, the elevator is only for morgue transport. Unofficially, it's gained a reputation as the final ride. The button for the basement floor, the one that leads to the hospital morgue, glows a dull red instead of the usual white. No one knows why. Facilities replaced the panel several times, still red. Orderlies who work the night shift claim the elevator sometimes arrives already open, without being called. And the light for the basement is lit, as if someone inside had pressed it from below. A few years ago, an ER tech named Sasha got stuck in that elevator for nearly 20 minutes. No one could explain the malfunction. Cameras showed the elevator never moved. But Sasha swore the floor numbers changed rapidly, flickering through levels that didn't exist. Negative floors, letters instead of numbers, symbols she didn't recognize. She said the walls began to fog up, and she could hear breathing, not hers, something deeper. When the doors opened, she ran out shaking. She never used that elevator again. Rumors say that if you ride alone at 3:03 a.m. and you don't press any buttons, the elevator might take you somewhere else, somewhere below the basement. One janitor claimed he found a stretcher parked in front of the doors one morning, soaked as if it had been left out in the rain. But there hadn't been rain in over 2 weeks. Security tapes don't show who left it there. And on the 1st of every month, the elevator doors open at exactly 3:03 a.m. Even if no one is around, it waits. The sleeping patient. There's a long-term care wing in the east building of Merrow Ridge Hospital, mostly filled with patients in comas or persistent vegetative states. Nurses rotate shifts quietly there, checking vitals, administering fluids, speaking softly out of habit. Room 816 is at the end of the hall, and the patient there, a man in his late 40s named Grant N., has been unresponsive for over 6 years following a massive stroke. Except some nurses say he wakes up. It always happens during night shift. The call light blinks. When they enter, he's lying there, just as before. Eyes closed, vitals steady. But small things are off. His hands are in a different position. The sheet is slightly pulled down. One time, a nurse named Haley swore his head was turned toward the door when it hadn't been a moment earlier. The strangest account came from a float nurse who only worked that floor once. She claimed she walked in and found him sitting up, eyes wide open. "He looked at me," she said, and he mouthed something, just one word. "Run." She blinked, and he was lying back down again, eyes shut, breathing slow. Security footage from that night is corrupted, just static. Every time someone tries to pull it, the file crashes the system. Grant's family hasn't visited in years, but someone leaves fresh flowers at the foot of his bed every Sunday morning. No one's ever seen who does it. They check the visitor logs. Nothing. The doors stay locked. And every once in a while, the call light goes off exactly at 3:16 a.m., even when the power is out. The Screaming Room 224B at Hollow Creek Medical was once part of the pediatrics wing, back when the hospital served a larger community. The wing was closed over a decade ago after a water main break caused significant damage. Most of the rooms were stripped bare, windows boarded, equipment removed. All except 224B. It was never cleared out. A single child's bed remains in the center of the room. Medical records indicate it belonged to a terminal oncology patient, a young boy named Lyle. The last note in his file reads, "Discharged, transferred to hospice." But no hospice center has any record of receiving him. His parents never responded to follow-ups. Eventually, the case was closed administratively. Now, maintenance workers refuse to enter 224B. They say they hear crying inside, screaming sometimes. Short, sharp bursts of agony that stop the moment the door is opened. One cleaner said she heard someone banging on the inside wall, and when she opened the door, the bed had moved. Security cameras in the hallway outside 224B glitch regularly, especially between 2 and 4 a.m. On several occasions, the footage has shown the door to 224B opening and closing with no one near it. One clip appears to show a shadow moving across the boarded window from the inside. A few years back, a group of med students dared each other to spend the night in the room. They lasted 15 minutes. They came out pale, shaking, saying they heard someone whispering their names, each of them, one after the other, from different corners of the room. Now the door is chained shut. A sign reads "unstable flooring," but that's not true. The floor has been inspected. It's solid, no damage at all, just cold, bone cold. And if you press your ear to the door at the right time of night, you'll hear it. A child's scream, followed by silence. The man in radiology was supposed to be empty. It was close to 2:45 a.m., and the imaging suite had shut down for the night except for urgent scans. A nurse named Carla had escorted a trauma patient down for an emergency CT. The tech on call, Devin, swore he saw someone else already in the control room when he arrived. A man in scrubs, back turned, staring at the monitors. Devin thought nothing of it at first and waved, expecting some night shift tech to be pulling data. But the man didn't respond, didn't move. When Devin entered the room, it was empty. He called out. Nothing. Just the sound of the machine cycling in the background. The trauma scan went fine. The patient was stabilized. Carla returned to the ER, but Devin stayed behind, double-checking the transfer files. That's when the monitors began cycling through images on their own. Not the trauma patient's scan, but dozens of old ones. Chest films, brain MRIs, files from previous years, all from deceased patients. One image stopped the cycle. A face. Not a scan, an actual face. Pressed up against the glass of the CT room window, blurry, too close, eyes wide. Devin turned around instantly. There was no one there. Security sweep showed no signs of entry. The system logs showed the images had not been accessed. The camera footage was corrupted. Later that morning, Devin found a sticky note in the control room, one he didn't write. Different pen, different handwriting. It read, "Scan complete. Room empty. Awaiting next." The white curtain. In the observation wing of Alder Hill Medical, there's a recovery bay that nurses refuse to use unless every other one is full. Bay 6. Just a curtain, a bed, and a wall monitor like the rest. But something's different. Patients in that bay complain about it. They say they wake up feeling cold, watched. One man said a nurse kept peeking through the curtain, but when he called out, no one answered. Another patient said she saw hands pushing through the curtain from the outside, but no shadow. No feet, just pressure, like someone was leaning in with their whole body. The staff dismissed it as post-anesthesia delirium, until a few weeks ago. An elderly patient recovering from routine hip surgery was placed in Bay 6. Monitors showed stable vitals. But during rounds, the curtain was found tied shut from the inside. The patient was gone. Security searched every inch of the floor. The elevators hadn't moved. No one had entered or exited the bay on the cameras. Except at 3:02 a.m., the camera feed showed the curtain draw open. Just slightly. Enough to see a face. But it wasn't the patient. It wasn't any staff. The figure was taller than the curtain bar, just standing there. And the video distorted the moment it moved. The patient was found 2 days later, in the sub-basement, wearing a paper gown, standing in the dark, alive, but completely silent. He hasn't spoken since, not a single word. When they asked him what happened, he just raised one hand and mimed pulling back a curtain. No one uses Bay 6 anymore, but the curtain still sways at night, even when no one is near it. The laughter in pediatrics. It was well after midnight in the pediatric wing of St. Catherine's, a quiet stretch of hallway where most lights dim automatically after 10 p.m. Only a skeleton crew was on duty, and the nurses were winding down for shift change. One nurse, Dana, was checking vitals when she heard something strange from room 214. Laughter. High-pitched and cheerful, like a child mid-play. Except the room was empty. It had been unoccupied for weeks, under renovation since a water leak damaged part of the ceiling. Dana opened the door slowly, expecting to find another patient's child who had wandered in. But the room was cold. The windows were closed, the overhead lights were off, and there was no one inside. She turned to leave, and the laughter came again, this time closer, directly behind her. She spun around, heart hammering, but the room was still empty. The next morning, the janitorial staff found tiny handprints on the inside of the window, too small to belong to any admitted patient, and definitely not from the outside. The prints were smudged across the glass in circles, like something had been spinning in place. Later that week, a nurse passing by room 214 swore she saw a child crouched by the bed frame, just for a second, before they vanished. The wing was blessed by a chaplain, twice, but the laughter still echoes through the vents sometimes. The Midnight Code. Every hospital has its codes. Blue for cardiac arrest, red for fire, yellow for missing patient. At West Haven Medical, there was an unlisted one, Code Indigo. Staff only ever heard it over the intercom late at night, between 3 and 4 a.m., always followed by a location deep within the hospital, usually a forgotten wing or old surgical suite. No one could say who started it, but it happened maybe once a month, always brief, always the same tone of voice, calm, female, flat. Code Indigo, Sub-Level 2. One night, a new resident named Alan heard the announcement and, unaware of the rumors, asked about it during rounds. The attending physician froze, then simply said, "Ignore it." Alan didn't. Curious and a little reckless, he followed the directions, down through 2 stairwells, past locked maintenance doors. Eventually, he found a door marked Sub 2. He thought it was just old storage. The lock was broken. The hallway beyond was pitch black and silent. No equipment hum, no distant alarms, just the faint buzzing of fluorescent bulbs far down the hall. He stepped in. His phone lost service immediately. The flashlight flickered. Alan made it maybe 20 feet before he saw something at the far end. A shape, human-shaped, sitting in a wheelchair, turned toward the wall. He called out. No response. The figure started to turn. Alan ran. By the time he made it back to the stairwell, the door to sub-level 2 was locked again. When security reviewed the footage, there was nothing on the cameras past 2:59 a.m., just static. He never asked about Code Indigo again, and no one else has tried to follow it. But the announcements continue. Same voice, same time. Code Indigo, sub-level 2. The visitor in room 309, Dr. Lively had been working back-to-back shifts in the geriatric unit of a small community hospital. By 2 a.m., the halls were dead quiet. The patients all tucked into bed, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like white noise. She stopped by room 309, where Mr. Weatherby, a kind old man with late-stage Alzheimer's, was recovering from pneumonia. He'd been asleep during her last round, but as she entered now, she saw him sitting upright, staring at the window. Not the curtain, the glass. His lips were moving. "Mr. Weatherby?" she asked gently. He didn't react. She got closer and could finally make out what he was whispering. He's here again, standing by the tree. The window faced a small courtyard. Nothing but shrubs and an old birch tree outside. She looked. Nothing. But when she turned back, Mr. Weatherby's nose was bleeding, a thin trickle. His hand trembled as he pointed at the glass. He watches at night, when the nurses go. Later, security checked the exterior camera feed. At exactly 2:03 a.m., static overtook the screen. When it returned 6 minutes later, the birch tree was swaying violently, though there had been no wind that night. The nurses started drawing the blinds in 309. Every night. The quiet room, every psych ward has one. The quiet room. A place for patients in distress. Rubber-lined walls, no sharp edges. At St. Edda's Hospital, the quiet room had been unused for years. Not because it was outdated, but because staff refused to enter it alone after what happened to Nurse Lynn. She was tasked with monitoring a patient named Joel, a nonverbal teenager who'd been found wandering a highway alone, unresponsive. Authorities never found his family. He showed no aggression, but also never spoke. He was placed in the quiet room overnight for observation. Nurse Lynn sat outside the door, reading. At 3:13 a.m., she heard a voice. Joel's voice. He was whispering something over and over. At first, she thought it was progress, his first words in weeks. But as she got closer, her stomach turned. He was saying, "He's crawling up the wall." She opened the door. Joel was standing in the corner, head tilted upward, eyes fixed on the ceiling. His fingers were pressed flat to the wall. He didn't blink. Nurse Lynn looked up. There were scratches on the ceiling tiles, deep ones. She slammed the door and ran for help. When another staff member returned with her moments later, Joel was asleep on the floor. Peaceful. The scratches were gone. They still don't use the quiet room. Not unless they absolutely have to. The elevator between wings at Larchwood Medical Center, the north and south wings are connected by a single service elevator tucked behind the radiology department. Most staff avoid it, not just because it's slow and clunky, but because of a rumor that's persisted for over a decade. They say the elevator sometimes makes an extra stop, one not listed on any floor directory. Dr. Madsen, an ER resident, had always rolled his eyes at the tale. But during an overnight shift, he found himself needing to move a portable ventilator to the ICU. The service elevator was the only option. As the doors closed, he pressed the button for floor 4. The elevator shuddered, lights flickered, and then it began to descend. Confused, he pressed the emergency stop. No response. The panel didn't display a floor number anymore, just a blinking dash. After what felt like a full minute, the elevator stopped and the doors opened. It was a hallway, long, dimly lit, with concrete walls and a tile floor streaked with dirt. A single gurney sat at the far end. There was no signage, no exit signs, no sound. Dr. Madsen didn't step out, but something stepped in. He never saw it, just felt it. A drop in temperature, the overwhelming smell of antiseptic and decay. Then, the elevator started moving again. When it stopped, he was on floor 4, alone. The ventilator was missing. Security footage showed Dr. Madsen enter the elevator. It never stopped on any unauthorized floors. But for 6 minutes, the cameras showed nothing. Just an empty elevator car descending, then rising again, with the doors opening to reveal a visibly shaken Dr. Madsen and an empty gurney. He never used that elevator again. The room that wasn't there. Nurse Thompson had been working nights for years. She knew the layout of Briarfield General better than her own house. That's why she was so sure something was wrong when she passed a hallway that hadn't been there before. It was near the east stairwell, where the pediatric and oncology wings intersected. Instead of the usual fire door, there was a narrow hall stretching 10 feet to a wooden door labeled 317. Room numbers in that wing didn't go above 312. Thinking maybe renovations had started, she pushed the door open. The room inside was cold, unfurnished, except for an iron bed frame and a single chair in the corner. The walls were peeling, paint bubbled with moisture. But what struck her most was the smell, like earth, like something buried. She backed out quickly, heart pounding, and fetched another nurse to confirm what she saw. But when they returned, the hallway was gone. The fire door was back. No one believed her, of course. Until a week later, when a janitor on night duty vanished. His cart was found parked near the east stairwell. On the clipboard attached to it, he had started to write something before stopping mid-sentence. Room 317 wasn't there yesterday. The hospital installed cameras at both ends of that corridor. Nothing unusual has been recorded, but sometimes the nurses say they hear a door creak open, even when no one's around. Through the double doors. During a long, quiet overnight shift in the pediatric wing, I was stationed near the double doors that led into the neonatal intensive care unit. The floor was low lit, and all the monitors hummed their usual digital tones. Around 3:15 a.m., the hallway went completely silent. No distant elevator hum, no staff chatter, nothing. Then, the double doors creaked open on their own. They're electronic and should only open with a badge swipe. But there was no beep. No badge use. Just a slow mechanical opening like someone invisible had triggered the sensor. I got up to investigate, assuming it was a malfunction. As I approached, the motion lights in the NICU clicked on one by one, as if someone were walking through the space. I peered through the glass, but saw nothing. No staff inside, no shadows. Just softly lit cribs and blinking monitors. Then I heard it. A lullaby. Barely audible. It was the same tune the NICU used when a baby was born, triggered by staff manually from the nurses' station. But there had been no births that night. I called the NICU on the intercom. No answer. I stepped through the open doors, heart pounding, and walked past each crib. All the babies were fine, monitors normal, vitals steady. But one mobile above a crib was spinning slowly, even though the air was still. Later, I checked the badge logs. No entry, no exits. The security footage glitched out for exactly 3 minutes around the same time. I asked one of the senior nurses if anything like that had happened before. She just nodded and said, "Sometimes the ones we lose come back to visit." The 5th bed, I worked nights in a long-term care facility with 6 identical rooms on each hallway, each holding 4 beds. Room 3B always had 1 bed left empty, no matter what. Staff rotated patients in and out of the others, but the 5th bed, near the back corner by the window, stayed untouched. The reason? Nobody wanted to sleep in it. Not after the incident 5 years ago. A resident named Walter had passed away in that bed during an unusually violent thunderstorm. The power had gone out briefly, and when it came back, Walter had stopped breathing. The CNA who found him swore he was staring at the ceiling with a look of absolute terror, not pain, pure horror. Since then, every patient who was assigned to that bed reported the same thing. Waking up in the middle of the night to see someone standing by the window. Not a nurse, not a shadow. A man in hospital whites, completely still, watching. One woman screamed so loudly, we thought she was having a seizure. She told us later that the man whispered her name just before he vanished. Eventually, the supervisor had enough. They removed the mattress, shut the curtain, and started pretending like it wasn't there. It's still officially listed on the chart, but no one fills it. And we all know better than to draw back the curtain. One new nurse, fresh out of school, didn't get the memo. She pulled the curtain back one night while cleaning, just to vacuum the floor. She came back white as a sheet, said there were footprints leading away from the bed, wet ones. But no one else had been in the room for hours. The other residents were fast asleep, and all visitors had checked out hours earlier. Now even the new hires avoid that corner. Because whether you believe in ghosts or not, everyone agrees on one thing. That bed isn't empty. Cold Code in Oregon 7. I'd only been a scrub nurse for 6 months when I had my first real overnight trauma case. Or 7 was where we did most of the emergency surgeries. And that night, the call came in for a crash C-section. The patient was a young woman who had lost consciousness in the ambulance. No family arrived with her, no ID, just a first name given by the paramedics, Elena. As we prepped, the anesthesiologist kept glancing at the monitors, muttering that her vitals didn't match her blood loss. She was pale, almost translucent. We were halfway through the procedure when the machines began glitching. Flat lines, spikes, then static. The surgeon barked for a code card, but the monitors refused to respond. The woman on the table suddenly gasped, opened her eyes, and looked straight at me. She whispered something. I couldn't hear over the noise, but it sounded like, "He's here." Then the lights flickered, and every machine shut down at once. We worked in silence, manually monitoring vitals using flashlights. But she was gone. The baby didn't make it either. The weirdest part? When we wheeled the body to the morgue, there was no record of her anywhere. No paperwork, no digital record. Even the paramedics denied ever bringing her in. The OR surveillance cameras for that hour wiped clean. The only thing left was her chart, written by hand, sitting on the table with one word scrawled across the top. Elena. Room 413 doesn't exist. I work as a float nurse, which means I get bounced between floors depending on need. One night, I was assigned to the oncology wing. We were short-staffed, and the charge nurse gave me a quick walkthrough. At one point, she pointed to a hallway and said, "Don't answer if anyone calls from 413. I asked why. She just shook her head and walked off. Naturally, I was curious. Halfway through my shift, I passed the 400s and 10s, 411, 412, and then 414, number 413, just a blank section of wall between doors. But that night, at exactly 3:13 a.m., a call came in from 413. The display on the console lit up red, not the usual yellow of normal calls, just a flashing, angry red light. I answered. There was no voice at first, just the sound of distant beeping like a flatlining monitor. Then, a woman's voice, dry and slow, spoke. "I'm not done." I froze. Asked her name. She didn't respond. Then the line clicked dead. I checked the call log. No trace. I asked the charge nurse. She said the wing used to have a room 413 years ago. A cancer patient died there after begging for another round of chemo. She was denied because the cancer had spread too far. A week later, she coded during the night. They say she cursed the hospital with her last breath. Now, every year on the date she died, 413 calls back. We don't answer anymore. Not after one nurse tried to. She disappeared for 2 hours. We found her in the supply closet, mumbling numbers and tracing cancer cell shapes onto the walls in her own blood. That nurse never returned to work. And room 413? It's not on the blueprints anymore. But the phone still works. Every year.